I am now live, and I didn't tell anyone that I was going live, so I suspect that no one else is going to be in here. That's okay. I don't mind talking about swords. It is Saturday night, and I had a few minutes, so I figured I'd have some time to just record my own thoughts about swords. I'm going to talk about this sword, but if anyone pops on and wants to talk about swords also, they're welcome to join me, and we can talk about whatever swords they want to. So I haven't gotten a chance to make a video specifically about this sword from Ludl, but this will serve at least as an introduction to it. So this is really neat, and I haven't had the opportunity to look at Ludl's work before. I've seen, Ludl was a maker, and if memory serves, they actually split the production company into two different brands. I don't remember if it was Ludl and then Blades by Ludl or Works by Ludl, something like that. Um, but there was a little bit of a division, and I believe one of them made a lower price point or a different type of product, a different standard of quality product than the original Ludl brand did. And so there was always a concern if you were purchasing something, you had to purchase it from the right line. And I guess now that they're not making blades anymore, you have to be a little bit careful if you see a sword that has the Ludl tag on it, that you're getting a sword that's from the correct production line. This one is a very nice piece. So if you compare it to other makers that are of similar price points, so for instance, things from Landsknecht um, Emporium, this has much nicer fit and finish than most of what I see from the guys from LE. Um, and the guys from LE can do nice work, but let's just say if this was, and I don't know what this retailed for, so perhaps it's not entirely fair if I'm comparing a $500 sword to a $900 sword. This would, I'd expect to have more attention to detail put into this type of sword. Let me see if I can get it right up next to the camera. So all of this has some very nice shapes and planes that are on it, and just the shape of the grip that's here, the way that this little kind of fuller is rendered into both the wood and then this beautiful, I'm not sure what they do. I assume that this is all steel that's been blackened, but it's possible that this is brass. I really wish I could see somewhere where the original metal is. I really don't want to hurt it, since again this is my sword. um but how evenly the twists are done. There's not an edge anywhere at any place along the blade, along the pommel, along the twin rings here. The I think that this little brass finial here on the end is perhaps the only thing that I would change. So on the original, there are originals that have a very prominent finial or peen cap that stick out proud like that. If they did, sometimes they're of different metal, but oftentimes they're just steel. I assume that he did this in yellow metal because some of the originals are gilded. And if you want to do that, then I think that you probably do have to take the time to do that in gold, because to me, it doesn't look as nice just doing this in kind of like a brass color. So if I were making recommendations, or if this was my commission, then in this Katzbalger, I'd probably change the color on that. Who's in here? Let's see. We have Matt. Hey, Matt. Yeah, so we're looking at this Katzbalger. This is a reasonably large one. Katzbalger come in all sorts of different sizes. I've actually, one of the, I'm constantly trying to do research. I'm constantly trying to figure out um, the origin of every sword, whatever the sword of the week is. And one of the things I've been doing is cross-referencing sword terminology in dictionaries from the 16th and 17th century. So I'll look at dictionaries that compare sword terms from Spanish to Italian to English to German to what have you. And uh, it's interesting. I've not seen Katzbalger used in almost any of these terms from that time period. I've only found it in a single dictionary so far. And in that dictionary, Katzbalger translated not into sword, but into halberd. And I've never seen that referenced anywhere academically in museum lists and museums, collections or anything like that. So admittedly, I don't read German particularly well, and if you're reading period German, then you have to be able to read black letter Gothic script, which is doubly hard for me. So I need some folks who are more fluent in German to be able to track down where, like, there's already a bit of a debate as to what the term Katzbalger even means. It's like cat bag, I think it means, or cat stabber. There, I've seen a couple different definitions there, um, but I'd really love to see how early we can trace back the term to see if it actually is a 16th century term or if it's a much later, 19th century historismus, because sometimes that happens. You end up with people in the Victorian period who are collecting things that are collecting things across hundreds of years, thousands of years, and so they have a whole bunch of things that look like this in their collection. And they're like, what do we call it? And they'll just pick a name out of the hat, and it may have nothing to do with what the sword was called in period. So again, the classic example is they start calling the big swords Beidenhänder or Zweihander. And so you can read 19th century accounts or collections where the big two-handed swords in an armory, in a castle, in a museum are called Zweihander. That was not ever used when the swords were actually being brought to war. They're called Schlachtschwert, like battle sword or slaughter sword. So I definitely need to research um, Katzbalger as a term a little bit more and how it got associated with these kind of medium length. Um, they they start at perhaps 50 centimeters, and then I consider this sort of hilt kind of typical of Katzbalger. So I will often say, if I'm looking at Arn, like, oh, that's a cat's style sword, but they come in arming sword size, long sword size, even two-handed sword size. So you can get giant great swords that have the double rings and even this kind of um, mushroomoid pommel on them. But the typical, what we think of as a Katzbalger, is definitely a backup weapon, a little bit bigger than a dagger, and oftentimes with a very rounded spatula tip on it, oftentimes with very intricate fullering. It's almost like having a gladius all over again. So they have this kind of pocket sword right there on the side, in addition to whatever their main weapon is, whether that's a two-handed sword or a halberd or a pike or what have you. They always have this at the side as well. So who else do we have here? So we have Matt Miller. Greetings from Canada. Hello up there. Last time I took the kiddos to eat some Tim Hortons not too long ago, just across at Niagara. And then we have Marcus, who is in Sweden. I have not had the chance to visit Sweden yet, but it is definitely on the list of places I would love to go. So, Marcus, I hope you're having a great evening. It's a little bit later than I am. Just no, I'm just going to go as long as I feel like going and as long as people are asking questions. I don't expect it to be a terribly long stream, but I'm glad to see that it's more than just me talking to myself. So I'll pull out the Ludl sword so that everyone can see. Again, I was very fortunate that my good friend Sword of Damocles was kind enough to let me babysit this, and it was to me, an opportunity of a lifetime to be able to have a functional flame bladed sword. That is a very rare sort of thing to get the chance to work with. Almost no makers are making accurate flame blades, and certainly not sharp ones. There's a handful of examples that you can get out there that are kind of like for sparring purposes, but the Flamberg or the flamboyant style swords are really, really rare, and for someone to be able to do it justice, I'll bring it up to the camera again so that you can see exactly how this blade was skillfully done. So you can see that the geometry is very complex, where it's much thinner in the edge has a longer bevel in each of these scallops, and it's got a much shallower bevel on each of these points. So it has a very complicated geometry as it goes along with it. So, hey, outside. So, yeah, I would not want to have to try and sharpen this myself. If I I've tested it after I've checked the edge after doing all of the tests, and again I tested it pretty hard. To be honest, I didn't explain to Chris all the different things that I was going to be doing with the sword, and I have hurt my own swords before. Fortunately, I've never actually damaged a sword that belonged to a friend yet, but I'm usually much rougher on my own personal swords than any swords that happen to be in sword daycare. But I still didn't tell him what I was going to do, mostly because I wanted the video to be a surprise to everyone as to what I was doing testing the Flamberge. But you know, I was rough. I hit it on some pretty rough targets, and so afterwards, I quickly inspected it, expecting to see, you know, at least scuff marks or something on it. And to be honest, I have not been able to find any evidence of any of the hardship that I put it through. So kudos to the maker. They made a very robust sword that has stood up to all of the abuse that I put it through on that video. I am going to try and I've filmed one additional test so far, but there's a couple more things that I'd like to try testing it. So just before, we'll continue reading chat, but just before I get too distracted, let me get the rest of my thoughts in order. Hang on a second. Need to move my computer out of the way. Last thing I need to do is stab the computer with my sword. So I didn't talk about it at all on the previous video, but this is the scabbard. I'm fighting lighting. If you guys will wait 1 second, can I get this light going? Here, hang on. All right. We just are going to bring a little bit more extra light into the frame so that I'm not operating in the dark here. It is very professional. Talk amongst yourselves. Who would have made a superior Bilbo Baggins? Adam Sandler. Discuss. All right. Pop this up. Definitely won't be tripping over this every time. I move my chair back and forward. All right. I'm so glad that I prepared for all of this before turning on the feed. Okay, let there be light. Oh. So now that everyone can see me, I'm trying to unplug my light source. Here is the scabbard, and it's not actually a scabbard. This is a sheath. So here, there we go. So this is just leather and it's floppy. And my understanding is this is what is characteristic of Ludl's work. So if you were to get any type of sword, be it an arming sword or a long sword or what have you, you could expect to get something not unlike this from him. I think it's actually rather handsome. It goes along with this, and to be honest, I haven't done enough research as to what the look the lawn's neck type of scabbards were like. Once we start entering the 16th century, you do end up starting to encounter some scabbards that don't have the same type of construction that you had found earlier in the medieval period. Um, in fact, you see a lot of swords from this period where the end, the chape, is gone and the sword is just sticking out of the end. Now, some of that may be artistic license, and there is just a it's intoning something. It's giving the impression that that is a it's a artistic convention to try and communicate something. So I've talked to other folks who know a little bit more about it than I do, and I believe that that's supposed to convey the idea that whoever has a sword like that is like no good, like they're a ruffian or someone who is a, a vagabond. Let's see if I can find one for you guys real fast. From my name, I think. Whoop, here. All right. And I have one that's got a Dusak. Here's an example where we have one where it's a messer that's sticking out. So let's see if I can share. How do I share the screen? If I go like this, in real time, I will try and present. Nope. Share screen. Allow. Allow. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see that. So over here, we have a guy and his poor scabbard is falling apart, and the tip of his sword is hanging out. And this is something that you see a lot of in the mid 16th century. So you can see that's from 1525 that is, and that's right around when these Katzbalger would have come into to play. So would this have been exactly like what you'd find in the mid 16th century, where it's flexible and just made out of leather? Possibly. I need to do a little bit more research. That's not one of my perfect areas where I do the most studying. Let me take a quick break and say hello to everyone, since I've been doing a lot of monologuing. All right. Lord Parker says, heard Baller Arms was interested in a new Kriegsmesser. Got a good relationship with LK Chen. Have you heard anything along that line? What am I allowed to say? I am allowed to say that there is a new messer that is being produced from Balor Arms, so from Cult of Athena by Balor Arms, and that it is being designed by James Elmsley, who is the leading researcher of falchions and messers. He came up with a variety of different designs that they went over, and they settled on which design that they wanted. And to the best of my knowledge, there's already, at least at the prototyping maybe stage. I don't know. To be honest, that's speculation on my part. I don't know that. I do not know who is producing it. I would assume LK Chen, but I don't know that to be true, because Balor Arms does use a variety of different makers for their swords. Beyond that, I don't know. LK Chen has not mentioned to me specifically that they're producing the Kriegsmesser. Every now and then, sometimes I'll hear about something that's in the works. I haven't heard about that one specifically. All right, what else? Matt asks, is that the one you did cutting with? So if you're asking about this sword specifically, yes, I have done cutting with it. And we have a video where I was testing it on a variety of different things, because not a lot of people have tested these flame bladed, wavy bladed swords. So, yep, this one has been tested rigorously and it has held up remarkably well. All right, JC's here. Hey, JC, I still want to see some of your work, my friend. Please share it sometime when you have the opportunity. Marcus says, is it slightly different geometry on the two sides, or is that the lighting that's making it look like that? So it's very difficult to see how the blade lines up. So it's easiest when you get to the tip, but the segments are not in line with each other. They're alternating. So the two waves are out of phase. So when there's a peak on one side, there is a valley on the other side, and vice versa. So the waves technically oscillate, but as far as the cross section, the type of it's not thicker or thinner on one side. The cross section is the same, other than the fact that the pattern is very slightly, it's one half a segment out of phase with one another. Okay. It just rolled over on my desk. All right. And Matt feels that Adam Sandler would have made a good Bilbo Baggins. We will have to see if someone decides to remake that movie for us. All right. JC says, those long-necked scabbards remind me very much of ancient Greek and Scythian scabbards. So, yeah, the Renaissance is a time of rebirth and revisiting on ancient designs. And these things here, this definitely reminds me of some of the scabbard elements that you find on Xiphe, on the straight swords of Greek designs, for instance. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if we found that they had some of that kind of Greek DNA when it came into the designs. Obviously, in Italy in particular, where they have so much of that culture that was being dug up, you end up seeing throwbacks. You end up seeing helmets that are like way old Corinthian style helms and the like. So that wouldn't surprise me if as I did a little bit more digging, I found parallels to the ancient world. Christopher Johnston says, hello, and is that a Khorne Berserker as your icon? If so, hello to you, and blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne. JC says, I most certainly intend to. I have most of the video filmed already. I had some shoulder trouble. Oh no, this slowed down on cutting tests, but I am almost healed now. Please heal up. I'm very sympathetic to shoulder pain. There was a while there when I didn't think I was going to be doing any cutting, because my my dominant arm was so out of whack with the shoulder. I thought I was going to have to do rehab and all sorts of stuff, but everything, cross my fingers, seems to be doing okay for right now. Hello, Monkey. Monkey says 35.5-inch katana is short. Okay. You must use very large katanas, my friend. He likes Dequatim's review of an O-katana. Interesting. All right. So if you like large katana, you can pick up whatever type of katana you like. The 35-inch katana would be particularly large, and most makers would not have that in stock naturally available. In many cases, you'd have to go to a custom maker to find a 35-inch katana. If you're talking about Nagasa length, if you're talking about either total length, or if you're including the habaki, then maybe you can find a 35.5-inch katana. But if you're just talking about the Nagasa, then that's quite big for what we would call an uchikatana. Most uchikatana, especially those that are either in use in modern martial arts or that are based on or shinken, that are being produced, let's say in Longquan, China, are based on Edo period examples, and by then you had restrictions that were following the Tokugawa rule set, and the restrictions in blade length didn't allow them to be that long. So it would be very unusual to find a katana that long. You can find blade lengths much longer than that in older period, in especially koto blades, but modern blades, not so much. All right, what else do we have? Marcus says, speaking of ancient times, but what is your opinion on leaf-bladed swords? I would really, really, really like to test a leaf-bladed sword. I came very close to having a couple of leaf-bladed swords that I'd be able to play with and really put through their paces, and each time it fizzled out, so I didn't get the opportunity. Um, Hopefully, in the not too distant future, I will get to try that soon. I think that they look gorgeous. I think that leaf bladed designs are some of the prettiest looking silhouettes. So the profile of the swords is just absolutely spectacular. Um, Generally speaking, I think that they are a way that sword makers of the period, and they tend to be Bronze Age and early Iron Age, were able to cheat with the type of material that they had in order to make it able to thrust and still have very good cutting ability when you have a sword that might only be this long. So if you don't have a particularly long sword, and you don't have the advantage of leverage to be able to have your cutting blade way, way, way long and have the advantage of that leverage to deliver the blow, then you're cheating by making it wider and still not have your sword fall apart on you, since you're using a much less reliable metal than steel. You basically don't see that design being used on steel age swords. So I'd love to test it, and I don't see any reason why you couldn't do it on a steel age sword, but it basically doesn't exist. Not that I can think of. Some types of gladius have a bit of a waist to them and flare out. But basically, once you have steel, you can make a very long, reliable blade, and you can just have it flat and wide the whole way up, and it'll do the same job. I think that they look awesome, and I'd love to see more makers continue to make um, leaf-bladed swords. All right. Speaking of Japanese swords, I'm a huge fan of nagamaki. Any thoughts on them that you could share? Nagamaki are really, really cool. Um, I think a lot of people get hung up on nagamaki and what is or isn't a nagamaki. Part of the problem is that Japanese swords kind of do cosplay, because you can take a blade and then you can put it in any type of furniture and it becomes a new sword. So if you take a tachi blade and you put it in uchikatana mounts, it becomes a katana. So you could take a long, long naginata blade and you could stick it in a long wrap and it turns into a naginata. So there, everyone will get hung up on, for instance, new makers, and they'll put a katana with a long hilt on it and they'll call it a naginata. If Or nagamaki rather. There are original surviving nagamaki. They're very rare. There aren't very many of them. But you can usually tell that they're actually nagamaki because their tang is really, really long, and they tend to be very large blades. I haven't handled them myself, so I don't know much about how they would perform, but they seem to have not been used too much. And to be honest, it seems like they're probably more closely related to Nodachi than they are to Naginata. So I'd like to test them because I like big swords. I like Nodachi, I like Odachi, I like Changdao, I like all of those, the big sabers. So I think they look really cool, and I'd love to test a faithful one sometime. You mentioned James Elmsley. His website disappeared. Did he ever publish his Elmsley typology? So yeah, he has problems with his website. He so um, so his typology was originally discussed in, it was originally published in Solingen in 2014, for peer review in a journal, if memory serves. I don't know. I took the time to publish his typology on Wikipedia. So he didn't have a Wikipedia entry the same way that Oakeshott did. So I drew his all of his diagrams and published it with some guidance from him. So that is there. However, he is perhaps planning to release an actual book detailing, for instance, like the history of falchions in Europe. He was soliciting that on Facebook a couple months ago, which would be a kind of a formal release of his typology and research. So I would look forward to that, and would definitely pick that up, especially if it would be, only, 30, 40 bucks, something like that. So hopefully we'll see that from James in the not too distant future. I started using aluminum cans in my cutting targets. Good target for Changdao or greatsword. Katanas hold up well too. Still a bit hesitant to use my new 18C or rapier on metal though. Let me know how that works for you, Lord Parker. I have seen some really cool footage of people using aluminum cans with swords, and I think it looks really neat when someone has a soda can or a beer can or something and just go swing through that. There's something always really, like cinematic about seeing a sword slice right through metal. But to me, I just don't. I'm already having problems with some of my finish getting scuffed up even by like hard plastics or hard wood, and to me, I'd be really concerned about a can and what it's going to do with the finish of a sword, especially something like a Japanese sword, where oftentimes they're brought to a very high polish. Let me know how it does for you. If you're finding that the cans aren't scuffing up your blades too much, maybe I'll experiment. Maybe I'll start with one of my swords that doesn't have a a very rough polish. JC says he likes leaf blades a lot, though it's a lot easier to cast a leaf blade than it is to forge one. I could see that being the case. And again, you do. It's true that you can cast some very intricate designs. Some of the designs that you get. So this is, of course, in this case, I do believe it's steel. I think this is steel, but sometimes you'll find cast hilt elements even in the Renaissance, and you can end up with all sorts of fancy designs when you're casting it. And certainly in the Bronze Age, you had very intricate hilts at times because they were able to cast the material in bronze, and then get away with it. So you do have, to some degree, a regression of design when you transition from the bronze into the iron and steel age, because at that point you're not able, you're limited to forging your materials, and so that the amount of detail you're put in has to be hammered in. And that's certainly a lot more difficult in some cases. I to some degree, I'm more knowledgeable about the Chinese Bronze Age than the European Bronze Age, but the intricacy of the designs and some of their, like the axe heads, the dagger axes. Oh my goodness, the level of detail they were able to get in the bronze is just absolutely spectacular. Marcus says, I would hazard a guess that they might have been either status weapons or anti-cavalry. As for the potential anti-cavalry aspect, just imagine the insane cutting power they possess. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Marcus. Are you referring to the wavy bladed, like the cat's swords that we're talking about? Not sure what you're talking about there. Parker says, I don't mind if the finish gets scuffed, as long as the blade doesn't take overt damage. I'm cool with it. I don't deal in antiques. Current results are fun, especially with the Changdao. And yeah, it's and that's fine. Like swords are to some degree meant to be used. So I don't expect my swords to stay pristine forever. So as I use them, they will naturally uh, show that they've been used. And once a sword reaches a certain point, then I accept that it's going to go through the ringer, etc. But so, for instance, the oldest LK Chen sword I have, the first one that I got is this magnificent Chu Jian, and it is one that I have cut down a whole forest worth of bamboo with, and hopefully the camera picks it up. That even to this day, it is just almost immaculate in how it looks with very little maintenance from me. Part of it has to do with the fact that it's got a rather robust edge because this, even though it's from the roughly the Han Dynasty, it is using Bronze Age designs, and because of that, it's they're using a slightly more robust edge since they had to cheat during the Bronze Age to make things a little bit thicker. This sword is just so much fun. Every time I pick it up, it's hard for me to put it back down. Hey, Duzzies, what are you doing up, mate? They actually made wall hangers in the Bronze Age. I think that you'll find that they made wall hangers in every age, my friend. Right? Bronze Age included. You're right. The Nagamaki. Yeah, so what was the Nagamaki used for? So, and we'll go back to your original comment. Hazard a guess that they were either a status weapon or anti-cavalry. As for the potential anti-cavalry aspect, imagine the Inting cutting power. So, my good friend Gunsen has a single picture. Let's see. By. So, he has this picture here, which let me see if we share it. Oh, I'm not sure if that'll work. Yeah. So this is the only period image of a Nagamaki that I'm aware of. So this guy is running here, and he's got it kind of there. So it's using it as a foot weapon against this other group of non-Japanese. I think these are Amishi. I think these are folks from Hokkaido, or at least northern Japan, that they're going up against. And he's got the big blade, and he's chasing them down. So we don't know much about their use. I'm not aware of any Koryu that works with them, but the theory is that it started out as a development of Nodachi, which are compared to many Japanese or Chinese two-handers. Chinese two-handers oftentimes have very long hilts compared to their blades, and by comparison, Japanese swords often will have a very long sword blade compared to the hilt length. The Nagamaki is going closer into the direction of some of the Chinese swords, so to the Jama Dao or to the Churang Dadao or the Chang Dao. The Nagamaki is closer to the proportions that you'll find on the Chinese swords, and some of that may be by the time it gets as big as these really heavy, robust Nodachi, the blade becomes so unwieldy that you end up needing a longer hilt to be able to accommodate it. There is some thought that these really, really ridiculously big Odachi were just that, were weapons of show, to show not just the smith's ability, but also to show that the clan, you'd have one big sword when your clan goes out saying, "This is us, we're badass. Don't come after us," just as a kind of intimidation and this display of prowess, sort of tool, sure, it could probably still hurt, but not necessarily that they had a whole bunch of tactics and a whole platoon full of guys wielding these swords. So there's some thought that that was going on with these big swords. Again, Nagamaki seem to be much, much more rare even than the Nodachi. So I'd say there's a lot of speculation at this point, but I don't specialize in researching it. So some of that's speculative on my part. The Changdao really feels like something made to cleave into armor rather than water bottles. Lord Parker, do you have the LK Changdao, or do you have one by someone else? JC says, I love all the little details. One of the reasons I got into Eastern Euro and Persian martial arts because weapons is because of their keeping of many of the Bronze Age tendencies like multi-fullering. Yeah, the type of stuff from the Caucasus, the type of stuff that you find on Persian blades. My goodness, you know, I think you work with Kama and Kanjal and things like that. Some of the blades that that you see, the amount of detail work that they have, you know, in a Georgian sword or what have you. Whoo, the detail that they put in those swords is absolutely spectacular. So a lot of time that go into it rather than just making a flat lenticular or hexagonal blade. They spend a lot of time on the anvil with all of your tools, putting those fullering in, and the blades are spectacular for it. Absolutely. And we have Kyle Smith here. Kyle in the house. Alien Dude, good to hear from you. Hope you are continuing to chop some bottles. Your cutting is getting so good. You're going to put the rest of us to shame. I expect to see a whole trophy room by the time that we have your next video up, my friend. Lord Parker says, one of LK Chen's first batch with the newer scabbards. I am jealous. I will let everyone here on the stream know a secret. Don't tell anyone. Don't go into the comments on any of my public videos. There's only 7 of us here on the channel, so this is a secret. Don't tell anyone. My Changdao has not been featured on the channel recently because it suffered a terrible mishap. This is my fault. This is Daltrix's fault accident that has happened. So this is my PSA. It involved Lancelot Chan's targets, but not for the reason people think it happened. So story time. What happened? I was fighting to try and figure out how to hold up these targets because the targets are heavier than tatami. They're around as heavy as the tatami once they're soaked because there's these big, heavy newspaper targets. And every time I would put them up, as soon as I'd hit them, whatever I was using to support them would get knocked over and fall over. And I have very specific requirements for whatever rig I set up because I need it to be able to be deployed, but also to be collapsible and to be able to be hidden away, requirements. So I can't just make a big 4x4. I can't pour concrete. It has to be able to go out, be deployed, be sturdy enough for me to use, and then hidden. So I was using PVC. I was using, pieces of wood. Everything I did, whenever I'd hit it, it would just fall apart. So I was getting really frustrated. And eventually, I came up with hammering a pipe into the ground. I tried using different types of PVC, and I couldn't get the diameter right. And eventually, I used a steel pipe. So I used a 1-inch, very thick steel pipe. And it worked great. And you can actually see a couple of my videos using this steel pipe in the ground, holding up the Lancelot Chan's targets. And so the one of the videos where I use the Long Chuan Jian, I go whack and I hit the target, like one of the first times I ever cut his target, and it just sailed right through without any resistance at all. I was expecting the target to be much harder to cut through, and it just boom goes right through. Like, wow, this is amazing. Lancelot, I think even he was surprised. I think he wanted a target, a stand that had less that moved a little bit more. Well, I was trying to cut a bigger target, like one of the big thick thigh targets. And so I tried it with the Albion Baron. Did I try it with the Baron? Yeah. Yeah, I think I chopped it with the Baron, and I chopped it with the Hanoi Tinker Great Sword of War. Both times they just kind of like thumped right into the target and didn't go through. I'm like, okay, we'll bring out the Changdao. Go through with the Changdao. Changdao just sails right through. Basically, there's nothing that I can put in front of the Changdao that is going to stop it. And then I tried another strike, but by this point, the target is so heavy that it's starting to slip off of the PPR core that Lancelot has, and it's starting to slide onto my metal stand. I didn't realize that. And I'm trying to conserve the target, and I come down with a one-handed strike. I didn't even do a two-handed strike. I did an overhead one-handed. I did spear deflect, one-handed strike with the Changdao, and it got straight through the newspaper target and goes clunk, and it bites into the pipe. And as soon as I did, I'm like, oh no. And sure enough, it took a big stripe out of my Changdao edge. It took like a, like 2-inch, 2.5-inch stripe. It's not the worst. It's not as bad as the Yanling Dao that had like nasty cuts ripped out of it. But I had just hurt the Yanling Dao doing something similar. And at that point, I was just so mad. I was just so frustrated, not at what I had done, but just because I had been fighting that rig for so long and I couldn't figure out how to do it, that I was just like done, especially since the Changdao was one of my favorite swords, period. That is, to this day, I think that's one of the best deals. It gives you so much sword for a great price. And the one I got in particular was really, really nicely done. And of course, I managed to wreck it. But I took this huge chunk right out of the pipe, the really thick, heavy steel pipe. So wasn't quite an anime style finish, but that big pipe, yeah, it got a bite taken out of it, unfortunately, to the detriment of the Changdao. So maybe I'll give Chris Fields a call and see if he wants to take a commission for reprofiling my poor big sword. You want to see the damage? Here, I'll probably sign off in a second, but since this is a secret and no one on the internet will see it, we'll show it before I sign off. All right. Where's my big sword? I don't know that this is going to show up on camera. I have swords falling all over the place. All right. Do. There we go. The poor blade. So this is a mono steel instead of a folded steel example. And it has been very, very durable up until this point. So I thought it was a bigger chip than that. It looks like it's only about 3/4 of an inch that came out of it. But, and I still gave it a couple of big cuts afterwards. So it's still a functional sword, but of course you hate to see something like that happen. Yeah. So this is the risks that you take. And again, I've been very fortunate that I've only injured my own swords. And admittedly, if I have a friend's sword, I don't do high risk activities with them. But yeah, that's a shame. That I was really put out when when that happened, because that was really one of my favorite. And for it to take a battle wound like that took the wind out of my sails for for uh, for a while. All right, it's getting kind of late, and I'm probably making enough noise, so I'll take one last note. What type of sword do you prefer? I'm very much biased towards single-edged curved swords, no matter whether Euro, Middle Eastern, or Asian swords. One of my all-time favorites is the Turkish Kılıç. Well, I think that I've made it pretty clear that I am an equal opportunist when it comes to swords. If you tell me I have a sword, I will say, show her to me. I will want to see it. There are certain swords that I am less familiar with than others. For instance, I have a pretty large knowledge gap about Filipino swords. I can identify that it's Filipino, but there are so many different islands and subcultures and subgroups, and there's a lot of overlap between what's knife size and big knife size and short sword size that that's an area that I need to do a lot more studying in. Um, Sub-Saharan Africa has a lot of different cultures and swords, and that's another area where I'm not as well versed as I'd like to be. So there are a couple areas that I don't know a lot about, but everything else I love. Now, if I had to say what is an area that I specialize in, it would probably be these. This is the reproduction of the saber of Charlemagne done by Hanwei. So this is the birthplace of the single-edged curved sword. So these are what I call early sabers, or nomad sabers, so Turco-Mongol sabers. And I've probably done the most amount of my brain power and research on these type of swords. So if I had a personal pet area of sword, it might be these. That doesn't mean that that would be the first type of sword that I would pick up if I needed to have a sword to do something, but they certainly have a special place in my heart when it comes to looking at swords and doing sword design, etc. All right. So Matt saying good night, and Marcus enjoying it. So I hope everyone appreciated the look at the cats and had as much fun as I did. I'm just going to sign off without a lot more to say, but we'll do this again sometime. I'm glad that I had more than just me by myself talking into the void. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed taking a look at a couple of swords, and another time we'll pop back on and look at a couple more swords. Have a good night, everyone. Take care.